We drive thee out with fiery broom. We drive thee out with death and gloom. Find out the true story of a portal, cleverly disguised as a farmhouse, when Mysterious World TV explores the mind of Andrea Perron, author of House of Darkness, House of Light. There is indeed some form of existence beyond death, and the world is finally ready.
Hi, we're here with Andrea Perron, and we're just going to jump straight in with the questions today. So, House of Darkness, House of Light is volume 1 of your book. You're just about to release volume 2?
Yes.
Can you give us a little teaser what's inside volume 2?
Volume 2 is the meat and potatoes of this. The way my mother puts it is volume 1 is the wind up, volume 2 is the pitch, and volume 3 knocks it out of the park. And because we like to use sports metaphors in our family for some reason. But it really is, it was more difficult to write, edit, and get this volume to the world than the first one was. It took 3 years to write all 3 books. But then, of course, being the completely obsessive-compulsive writer that I am, I had to go back through word for word, page by page, sentence structure, everything had to be exactly perfect. In fact, my publisher said it's one of the very few flawless manuscripts he's ever seen.
That's right.
And
impressive.
I'm so thrilled because it's got 1.25 million characters in it, and he couldn't find a typo.
Wow.
Needless to say, it's 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is
Absolutely.
A true emotional commitment. But the difficulty for me with Volume 2 is because it really deals with everything that happened to my mother, the really tumultuous experience that the entire family endured. So Volume 1 really brings you up to the point where Ed and Lorraine Warren come into our lives. And in the process of that happening, especially because Lorraine is a psychic, a medium, she stirs the spirits like crazy. So that was one of my mother's biggest concerns, is that she came into our farmhouse that had at the time been relatively quiet for several months. As soon as she got there, stuff started happening again. And so there was a great deal of reluctance on my parents' part about, do we really want this much help? You know, is there anything that these folks can really do for us? There's an entire chapter about Ed and Lorraine Warren called War and Peace. Play on their name. I can write voluminously in much the same way that the original author of War and Peace could. Consequently, I focused a lot of time and energy on making sure that I represented their presence in our lives appropriately, because ultimately they were not able to rid the house of the spirits. All the spirits that were in the farmhouse 40 years ago are still there. And I know that for a fact because every time I go back to the farmhouse, something happens immediately. I am instantly recognized. I took my father back. You met my dad last year. I took him back for the first time. He hadn't been there in 32 years since we'd moved out. And immediately, the presence that always followed him around, the one that was always with him, immediately touched him as soon as he went into the cellar.
I was standing right here when something
but
went behind my collar.
I thought I heard it too, Raj, but then I think it was downstairs and I heard talking.
No, it went right down my collar. I thought it was maybe a web or something, but there's no web here. Yeah. Well, if that's her way of communicating with me, then so be it, but it's not the way she used to.
I heard something. When you did that, when that happened, I heard something.
Yeah.
It could have been them up there.
I don't know. I don't know. It wasn't them. Because I felt that I was standing right here. And I felt it. Well, gal, if you want to come to me, come on. I don't know. Been a long time. She may have forgotten about me. But then spirits don't lose time. They don't. Time means nothing to them. Oh well.
So, well, before we get into Volume 2, let's chat some more about Volume 1 for the people who haven't had the pleasure of reading the book straight away. I guess I'm going to throw you right in the deep end here because so much happened in the 10 years that you lived in that house. What would you say is possibly the most profound experience you had? If I know it's going to be impossible to think of just one.
Oh, I can.
Go ahead.
I can. The most profound experience that happened to me personally was when I was 17, just about to turn 18. And I had gone off to college. I went to Chatham College in Pittsburgh, which is now Chatham University. And I was destined to go there. I knew that that was where I was supposed to get my education, private women's college. Wonderful school, incredible school. But I was miserable. I missed my family. I missed my ghosts. I missed my farm. I missed everything about my life. I was exactly 666 miles from door to door. And just completely overwhelmed. I had never been away from my family before. So I started whining immediately because it's true. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. And so I started calling home. Mom, Dad, please, please bring me home. I can't do this. These people are crazy. And I did.
They're crazy.
Well, I had the roommate from hell. Trust me when I tell you. In fact, I write about her in the book. I hope she's dead or something because I don't ever want her to come back and haunt me. But she was awful.
She could still come back and haunt you.
Oh, that's true, too. Oh, thanks for sending me down that road. But they flew me home for my 18th birthday, which was October 10th, which, of course, always falls on Columbus Day weekend. And so we had a 3-day weekend. So I flew home on Allegheny Airlines, which no longer even exists, probably because they called it Agony Airlines. But it was really great. And they actually fed me real food on the plane.
Oh, back in the days.
So I came home. And Mom had made a wonderful dinner, but I had already eaten. I really wasn't hungry. I figured I'd nibble later, but I was cold to the bone. Cold, like supernatural cold. And if you've ever experienced it, you know it is distinctly different from just being chilly. And it didn't even occur to me that it was the house and that something was about to happen. I remember distinctly I had on a brown pair of corduroys that matches this rug exactly. Oh. Thick corduroy. Back in the day when that was the cool thing to wear and you wore it just to stay warm. And I backed up to the fireplace, stood on the hearthstone, and I remember specifically thinking I'm standing too close to the fire with corduroys on. But I couldn't get warm. I just couldn't get warm. And my family, I was in the parlor, and my family was all in the dining room sitting at our table, and they were having dinner, and my father was, of course, at the head of the table. And I was looking down and staring at the hearthstone, and the entire right side of my body turned a slab of granite. And I heard my father drop his fork, and I looked up, and there he was, and he said, "Someone's come to welcome you home." Well, I couldn't move, but I knew that I could turn my head. And when I did, I turned my head, and I looked directly into my own eyes in the facial structure that was identical. It was identical. It was a mirror image, a reflection of myself in a woman whose hair was all up in a bun, and she was dressed in 17th century garb. And she was standing there looking at me, and I was looking at her, and I knew that I was looking at myself from hundreds of years before.
Is that like you're a reincarnation?
Yes. It's in volume 2. That's why we were called to the house,
So,
to tell their story.
how many times? Because I know you talk about seeing the spirits in different ages, but it's the same spirit.
Yes, which is amazing. Angie, that's one of the most amazing things about the house. We saw the ghost that we called Manny. My sisters, named the ghosts like pets.
I would so do that.
No, Nancy says he's a man. We'll call him Manny.
Logical.
Okay. She was, 10 years old. It made perfect sense to her at the time. And my mother saw him as a young man, but she also saw him in an entirely different dress as an old man just prior to when he died. He committed suicide in the house, crawled up into the eaves and drank horse liniment and died in the house. One of many of people that we don't even know about everyone. Just the records are incomplete, and of course, because the house goes back to 1680, it was fully inhabited by the early 1700s. It took years to build it and then build onto it and build onto it. It's an enormous structure. I'll give you some really great photographs of it. The thing that was so amazing about it is that the spirits that we saw in the house would appear at different ages, which made me always wonder, are they appearing because of an ancient memory that they have of being in that farmhouse is so intense that just by them in another realm thinking about being in the farmhouse is enough to make their spirit manifest?
Because that is so unique to have apparitions at different ages, and I assume different, I don't want to say costume, different dress. Yes. That is so unique, because that made me also wonder about, it's so mind-blowing, it's almost hard for me to verbalize what I'm trying to say. If you're looking at yourself, if you're a reincarnation of yourself, because I always think, okay, if you...
Okay, what's happening in your mind right now happened to me for 10 years.
Okay, God bless you, because, wow, okay. I was just thinking it was the blonde. Because if you die, I would think that your consciousness, your energy, if you were reincarnated, then how could you be there unless, just say, there was some kind of parallel. What if there's a parallel dimension and you're all living these lives and then somehow it
intersects?
Something like that.
Yes.
Because That's
Because if you think about your spirit is going to be inside you right now, so how do you see your spirit from another time? Because isn't it inside you
because
right
your
now?
consciousness.
Exactly. I understand exactly what you're saying, but I think much the same way that the human worship is of God is taking something that we cannot comprehend and trying to bring it down to a much smaller thing than it actually is. I think it's the same with spirit. I think that we possibly could be living multiple lives in multiple dimensions simultaneously.
I kind of lean sometimes towards, not necessarily your story, but cause that's, try and to wrap your head that you're looking at yourself. What did you feel?
Love. Just like, I mean, her eyes were just identical to my eyes.
You've definitely got very piercing eyes. I mean,
and they were watery like mine usually are because I'm always on the verge of tears. I cry at dog food commercials. I can't help it. I don't know what it is. I used to have a dog like that. I mean, it's pathetic. It is. But I think when you're super sensitive, you're sensitive in every capacity. I laugh hysterically and cry miserably and everything in between. But I remember distinctly looking into her eyes and recognizing my own and knowing that I had lived in that house before, and I didn't tell a single person in my family for 30 years because I didn't want anyone who'd already been through everything they'd been through. We'd already lived there 6 years when this happened, and I didn't want any of them to have, on top of everything else emotionally that the family had been through, to have to start to literally wrap their minds around the potential of coming back to that house over and over again. I thought that if I had been there before, it wasn't just me. We were drawn to that house, and I write extensively about that in the beginning of Volume 1. And I've been asked numerous times, why don't you just start the story at the farmhouse? Because then you're missing everything that brought our family to that place. And it was a compelling series of circumstances, and everything fell into place perfectly. We could no more afford that house at that time as we could have afforded this hotel. It was out of the question, and everything fell into place, and boom, we were there.
It's even beyond the falling into place. It was the signs that you had a dog called Bathsheba before you moved into the house. It was the fact that your mother, Carolyn, wasn't looking at the classifieds and the ad glowed at her. It was the fact that when she went and made the inquiry, nobody else had made the inquiry.
And no one ever did. We were the only call on that piece of property, and we didn't know that for many months when the realtor finally at the closing divulged to my mother, who said, I had to give you that check for $500. And she said, Carolyn, I never got another phone call on that farm from the moment you called, and you called the first day that it was in the paper.
And then at the end, I mean, your whole family turns up with this sense of destiny and familiarity. So that being said, if this is the reincarnation, if you're talking maybe 8 generations have been in this house already, if this is the reincarnation, is this just for you? Or does Cindy see herself, and Christine see herself, and Nancy see herself? Or was this about you?
Apparently it was about me, which is why I knew from a very young age that I needed to pay very close attention to what I was observing in the house. Because I knew from the age of 12 that eventually I would be the one to tell the story. I knew it. I knew I was going to Chatham College. I was accepted to colleges and universities all over the country. And I had scholarships offered to me everywhere. And I said, no, I'm supposed to go to Chatham. I knew I was. I knew. I knew when I met you that we would do something like this sometime soon. And you told me nothing about this venture.
Exactly. You wrote about it in the book that you autographed for me. It's really really crazy.
That's probably not the best word choice, but that's unusual, unique.
It's really unusual
And unique, yes.
So how are your sisters doing now?
Let me backtrack just a little bit, because there's one other point that I need to make about the house. My mother was the one initially drawn to the house. My mother was the one that felt compelled to own this piece of property. But when I got there, and when all of us got there, within a few days after my father returned home and found out that we just bought a farm.
Your father, I tell you, read those pages and you're like, poor guy.
You know,
every business trip, I'm not going.
What's she going to do this time? We all had such an incredible sense of familiarity, like all of us had just been there forever. We knew our way around. Sweet old Mr. Kenyon just said, go, play. Go, girls, play. Of course, he wanted to talk to the adults that he wanted to sell the farm to, but he was absolutely sure. He was absolutely sure that we were the family. Now, keep in mind, 8 generations of the same extended family from the time this house was built. The land was deeded by Roger Williams in the original Providence plantations, and that was to keep Massachusetts and Connecticut from gobbling up the little colony of Rhode Island. And so he parceled out huge, vast tracts of land, and one of the families that got it was the Richardson family. They go back to the Mayflower. I mean, the Dexter Richardson family, it was known as the Dexter Richardson house before it became the Arnold estate. But the Arnold family goes back that far, too, the Mass Bay colony. So as people started coming down out of the Mass Bay colony, coming out of Connecticut, starting to find this little pristine area called Rhode Island, of course, they started intermarrying, which is always a better choice than marrying your first cousin. Always. And so it went from being the Dexter Richardson house to early in the 1800s becoming the Arnold estate. And the thing that was so interesting about it was he was married to a woman who was originally an Arnold. And then the Thayer family, which is also very, very well-established upper crust New England. Old money from England. We were the first ones to live in that house that weren't original to the house. So 8 generations of people lived and died in that house, and I'd say a good dozen of them never left. At least a dozen. But one of the points that I wanted to make, and see, you gave me another good to bring me back around. There was a little girl, I believe it's in Volume 1, Go Away, Little Girls, the chapter about the little child that would walk through the bedroom upstairs. Yeah. And she was another one that we would see, sometimes dressed in a very fine, almost full-length green velvet dress. And she was very healthy when we saw her. And she was a little itty-bitty thing. But when she was not healthy, we would see her in almost like a gray flannel. And she would carry a book around with her a lot, and she had a handkerchief up under her sleeve. And my sister Cindy is the one who saw her first. Apparently, that was the bedroom. The middle room upstairs is the room she died in. And she died at approximately 5 years old, perhaps 6. Of course, back then, everybody was smaller in frame and stature anyway. And Cindy would come and crawl into bed with me and say, Annie, she looks just like you. She looks just like you. Haven't you seen her yet? And Cindy was 5 years younger than me. So the only way that she could know what I looked like at 5 years old was through our family photographs, which she had seen. And she always said, that's you. I don't know how, but that's you. And at first we thought there were 2 of them, but it turned out that the one that would manifest in the green velvet dress, that was her burial dress, because she showed up at the foot of my mother's bed during the incident with the torches. And when the mistress of the house, who was tormenting and terrorizing my mother, came that night, she had all of them with her. everyone that we had seen in the house and then some. There were a room full of spirits around her bed, all holding fiery torches.
That's probably one of the most terrifying recollections that's in Volume 1, I think, is they were threatening your mother.
We drive thee out with fiery broom. We drive thee out with death and gloom.
Just terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Just going back to where you say that the little 5-year-old girl, so would you believe that was you too?
Well, Cindy said so. I never really got, other than a peripheral glimpse of her walking out of my bedroom. She'd walk right through the door from my bedroom into that room, just right through it. And so I caught a few glimpses of her over the years, but Cindy saw her when I said, Cindy, as I'm writing the book, Cindy, how many times did you see the little girl? Thousands. Thousands of times.
Was there any interaction, or was it like a...
No, there was never any interaction with her, although there was with Johnny Arnold, who we called Manny. One time my mother was coming through the kitchen, and she was rounding her way into the front hallway, which was a very active, because that was the cellar door, the main cellar door, and then the stairs up to Nancy's room. And she was just walking through the kitchen, and she rounded the corner of the front hallway, and there he was in his typical pose, but he had his hands down in his pockets, and he was wearing a completely different outfit, and he had like patches, hand-sewn patches on his jacket. He was dressed very nicely, and he was in communication with someone who was invisible to her. And when she rounded the corner, he stopped talking to whoever he was talking to and turned and looked directly into her eyes, and then turned back and continued his conversation and disappeared.
I mean, did you ever think about past life regression?
My mother was hypnotized once, which is why we have the chanting incantation in its entirety, because frankly, my father didn't believe. He thought that this was just a very elaborate dream, and he just didn't believe. And so he's a master hypnotist, and he and another hypnotist that he worked with took her back to that night, and that's why we know all the detail that we know, because it was right there. And that was the turning point for my father. That's when he knew that everything he had been told by his wife and his 5 children was absolutely true. And that's when he had to swallow it all back, all of his doubt and his suspicion and his, his theories and his pragmatic.
He's a Virgo.
Yeah, but so is she.
And so am I.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There is a scientific explanation for the existence of spirits.
That's what we're hoping to find, some commonality where we can find what the pattern is, give us a thread that we can follow. Because the fact that you have all these spirits at the end of your mother's bed, that's kind of unusual, isn't it? To have them all, the amount of energy it must take to manifest and to be able to actually verbalize what they want. I mean, that's very unusual.
What is it about what are your theories that the property holds all of these? Is it the property that holds all of these?
It's not just the house. I brought some photographs for you today that no one has seen, no one, that I will share with you. I will tell you that I don't do investigations for anybody with anybody, and the reason is because I'm a magnet. And what will happen is that if there's any kind of spirit activity within who knows how far, it's right on me. I have had to leave public speaking engagements because of attachments that literally sucked my energy out of my body. I had to leave Ripley's Believe It or Not, St. Augustine, Florida. I was booked for the whole day doing the ghost tour at night. I had to leave, and it was because they just come to me. Well, I can walk into the barn of that house, and that's as active, if not more active, than the house. And there were several deaths that occurred in the barn. there was also a great deal of living that occurred in the barn. And I have the spirits of animals, I have the spirits of human beings, and all I have to do is walk in, and I always approach it the same way. I knock on the door, and I ask permission to enter, and when I go in, I let them know that I'm there, and I ask them if they will come to me and let me photograph them, let me capture them, because that's my job. I was assigned that job as a 12-year-old, as the observer and the one who took copious notes and journaled like crazy for all the time that we lived in that house. I was never afraid of them. I was afraid only once in that house, the night that I thought I saw my mother die. And that was the only terror that I ever remember feeling in that house. And other than that, I was a watchful observer. And so that's my job, and they know it. So the last time I went, I took a good friend of mine, Julie Griffin, who is a professional photographer, and she's a professional ghost photographer. She just released a book. You should read it. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I think I saw the book.
I helped with that.
Yeah.
I did.
Another feather.
It's, well, you know, what are you going to do? She said. She asked. I said yes. And she's got some incredible captures. But she said, what I want to do is I want to photograph you photographing the barn. And at one point, she just dropped her camera down and just watched because of the sparkle, because of the light that came around me. Thousands of images, thousands. You can see faces in them. You can see, I've got one of a cat sitting on the floor. You can see, completely translucent. You can see right through him, but he's sitting down at the base. Horses, cows, human beings, a little girl. It's amazing. It's amazing. When you see these photographs, you won't believe what you're seeing. All I do is ask them, but they talk to me through here in the same way that they talk to all of my sisters. And my mother and my father, interestingly, has really, and he's 77 years old, but he has finally in the last decade or so really developed his innate abilities as well. He was just as affected as we were. It was just his reaction was fear-based. He didn't want to believe it because he didn't want to deal with it because it was nothing he could control.
Because I just assumed, I was reading the book and it seemed that as you girls were growing up, you, do I want to say the word, became more tolerant or mature, or that it almost became like you were growing up with an extended family? Because I was reading about where Cindy, was it Cindy that took 3 years to actually open up and talk to you, or was that Christine? Christine.
And I live with her.
Wow. When Bathsheba appeared to Cindy, and it says, you know, her head was off to one side, she was faceless, and it was like a grey mesh covering her face, and she was a child. And she said, oh, I didn't feel threatened by that. Is it her recollection, meaning she didn't feel threatened? Because I'd have been out the room so fast.
She was terrified, but she didn't feel threatened. And it's important to make that distinction. In the same way that when Christine was approached in her room, when she took over my parents' original bedroom downstairs, you know, fearless, oh, she won't mess with me, everything's fine. And when she was approached, she said the exact same thing. I didn't feel threatened by her, but I was terrified because she's so ugly.
But Bathsheba originally was ravishingly beautiful.
Ravishingly beautiful. And in the death record for her, she died in 1885. And in the death record, there's a fascinating entry from the doctor who examined her body. And he said that he listed the cause of death as paralysis, but he said in the death record, in his notes, it was as if her body had turned to stone.
That's really, really fascinating. The thing that with your sisters not feeling threatened with Bathsheba, and this probably moves on to the volume 2, but did Lorraine Warren, did she not think that Bathsheba was pure evil?
She's really the one who dubbed that spirit Bathsheba Sherman after having looked at some of my mother's research. And I think that it followed logically to her that would be the spirit. My father thinks that it's Mrs. John Arnold because the language used in the incantation is archaic English, and that it would be more appropriate to the 1700s when she lived than the 1800s.
That's logical.
So he always thought, and she's the one who hung herself in the barn when she was 93. I start volume 1 with, what kind of pain was she in that at that age decided to take her own life?
And do you think it was anything influenced by the house?
I could sit here and talk to both of you for hours and hours, and you would hear the same phrase over and over again. I don't know. I don't know. And I think that there are a lot of people out in the world that claim that they do know, and they don't. Because if we don't know, no one does. To live in that kind of an intense, absolutely compelling environment, literally day in and day out, to experience all that we did, and to still not have the answers, I don't know if we're supposed to have the answers. I think that that's part of the mystery of life, but I absolutely believe that the veil is thinning. I think that we are now entering a time, I don't think it's a mistake that a bell went off in my head in August of 2007 that said, leave your job, write this story, it's time. I had a very good, lucrative job. I had a wonderful home and everything that I could want in life. And I left it all behind to come to Georgia to be with my family so that I could tell this story authentically and accurately as much as possible. And I have 6 notebooks sitting on my desk where I spent countless hours interviewing every single member of my family. And when I started to compile the entire manuscript, all 1,500 pages of it, I thought, Nancy's not going to remember it the same way Cindy remembered it. Mom's not going to remember it the same way that April remembered it. When I put the entire thing together, I had to change 1 season of an incident from autumn to spring. One thing that did not mesh completely. And I think that that's because when you have an experience that is that compelling, that is so surreal, it plants itself in your mind. And I can detect aromas just thinking about being in that farmhouse. I can detect, the mind is amazing.
I think most people would relate like a piece of music.
Exactly, and it takes you right back to the first time you heard it and who you were with and what you were wearing, etc.
Going back to Christine, she obviously was more, I assume, more traumatized than the rest of you girls, that she couldn't, for 3 years, that she couldn't open up. As a sister, what was the most disturbing story that she told you that you were just thinking, why didn't you tell me? Why couldn't I have been there for you while you went through that? What was the one thing, if there is just one?
It was when she was approached.
By Bathsheba?
Because I was in college. I wasn't there. And my sisters and I had this thing we called the ghost post. And whenever anything would happen in the house, to any one of them individually, that was their opportunity to process it therapeutically by writing me a letter. And so I have letters that I save everything. I have my letters from my sisters. And I remember Christine's not the one that wrote to me about that. Cindy was. Christine couldn't talk about it. It took everything. And in fact, Christine just recently granted the first and only interview that she ever gave to my friend Les. And he tried with all his persuasive powers to get her to talk about that incident, and she just simply cannot. And the other thing is the killing of our rabbits, her pets, which is in volume 2, and it's very hard.
I would have a lot of trouble reading that. I think
you won't get through it dry-eyed. You will not.
I couldn't even read about your dog. It was really, very, very, very upsetting for me. That's why, because we will go further into the book, but that's why I wanted to know just, how is everybody today? I mean, how on earth does that affect you for years and years to come?
I think that it becomes an intrinsic part of your personality. I think that it literally folds and melds into who you become, as you would fold melted butter into a recipe, and it would just simply disperse and become part of the greater recipe. And I think that all of us have dealt with it the same way. I'll tell you a really funny story. I lost one of the photographs that I needed to put into volume 2. Now I have thousands of photographs. I was a shutterbug from way back, and most of the photographs that we have of the farm I took because everybody else was too busy living there to pay much attention to the fact that we maybe should document this part of our lives. And none of us really ever thought we were going to leave there. So you kind of take it for granted. Oh, we're all going to be here. So, but I took a lot of photographs of the place, and I needed this particular one to go to the publisher because its perfect place was in volume 2. And I was frantic. I searched. I knew it was there, and I finally got so upset, I called Cindy. Cindy lives 2 miles away from where we live. And I called her. I said, Cindy, I can't find a photograph. I need it for volume 2. The publisher needs it. It's got to go now. I don't know where it is. Do you see it? And because I know how she is. And she said, no, I don't, but I'll send help immediately. And that's how we talk to each other. She said, she just said, I'll send my guides. They'll be right there. It's right there. Don't worry. They'll find it. And I sat and I got quiet. And I said, come help me. This is important. It needs to go out today. Please help me with this. And I stood up and walked over to my desk and lifted the printer on my desk next to my computer, and it had slid underneath it. And there it was.
Wow. So it sounds like Cindy has some psychic ability to some degree.
She's amazing.
What about
Cindy is amazing.
Christine, Nancy, April, do they have?
Christine spends most of her time denying it, doesn't want any part of it, and we had many things. Oh gosh, I don't even know if I should tell you this. I'm going to tell you this. So the worst she can do is throw me out. I'll just go live someplace else, and I'll take my cats with me. Christine wants nothing to do with this, pretty much in general.
Okay.
She doesn't want to revisit it. She doesn't want to go back to the farm. She doesn't want to know the current owners. She really gets uncomfortable talking about it. And we've had a series of incidents in the house since I moved in.
Oh, boy.
Because, of course, my spirits travel with me wherever I go. And stirring everything up, writing the story, telling the story, essentially was begging for it. And I've kept it pretty quiet. I haven't discussed it much with anybody. My mother and I can talk very, oh, Mom, guess Aunt Frankie was here this morning. Aunt Vivian was here this morning. It's perfectly normal. She completely understands. She senses them too. She sees everything I see. But we can't talk about it with Christine because she'll put me, I'm twice her size, and she'll put me up against a wall and say, my house is not haunted. At least it wasn't before you moved in. Okay, chick, back off, because I can take you.
That's sister's thing.
Oh.
But that's interesting that you didn't know you had any kind of psychic ability before you moved into the farmhouse, or?
I always knew that. I don't want this to sound in any way ego-based, because it's not.
Right.
But I have had a sense my entire life that there was something special and different about me, that I was a misfit. I was one of those freaks that just didn't fit in. And I'm 54 years old now, and I have come to understand that the reason that I always felt that way is because it's true. I don't belong here. I'm only visiting. And I have things to learn myself, but I also have messages to disseminate, and that this was my destiny and my role for this time around. And I think that by telling this story, I don't know if it guarantees my release from the house, but I truly hope that it does ultimately release me from that house, because I don't ever want to live there again. I don't ever want to be that cold again, and I don't ever want to have my thoughts that convoluted again, to be that challenged. And yet, I tell people all the time, it was the best decade of my life. I learned everything I needed to know about life and death in 10 years of my childhood, and have lived my entire life having virtually no fear of death. I might have moments where I fear pain, but I don't fear death, because I know, based on everything that I've seen happen to my family, what I've witnessed with my own eyes, and what I've sensed happening around me, I know without any question that there is something beyond our mortal existence. But I can no easier tell you that what it is now than I could when I was 12 years old. What I decided to do, and what my mother actually suggested, is that I print out a few pages of Volume 2, because no one has seen it, no one, except for the publisher. And she said, just go into it and sense where you should. Just scroll down and sense where you should stop. So I closed my eyes, and I scrolled through the manuscript, and I just released my finger off of the mouse, and it landed right here. So I brought this for you to read to you today. And interestingly, it feeds right into exactly what we were discussing. So I'll read this to you, and then we can discuss more of that. It's, I start and I end every chapter with a very compelling quotation that is appropriate to the subject matter. So that's what I did. And this chapter is called Blessings and Curses. And it begins with, never to suffer would never to have been blessed. Edgar Allan Poe. One of my favorites. He was a nut job, okay? Yeah, I'm perfectly normal compared to that man.
Yeah, he's got some stories.
Yeah. There were too many blessings to count. Blessings abound when someone knows where to look, and if one is looking everywhere all the time, they will be seen like spirit itself, omnipresent. In spite of their trials and tribulations, there was perpetual lightheartedness, an ethereal spectral wonder about being in the place they truly loved. The children were particularly tolerant of what their mother perceived as a curse. It was the price they paid to have the home they adored, and it was not such a heavy toll most of the time. When escape became necessary, there was always the fair woods, so lovely, dark, and deep. Promises to keep to one another, they protected their mindset by traveling all together to a peaceful pond or a babbling brook. The girls learned early how to count their blessings. As time passed and events transpired, it became more important to notice what was good and pure and true. However, one cannot escape the fact there were horrors to behold. It was during these times when they found comfort and solace with each other, embraced by the loving arms of those who endure the same and understood the fear. It was their saving grace. Strange as it may seem, suffering as one, feeling that pain with and for one another, was a blessing in disguise. They were never alone in the dark. There is something to be said for being surrounded by those who instantly believe, by those who never question if what was seen was real. It preserved and enhanced the bonds which have lasted a lifetime. In spite of what may be perceived as a childhood cursed, they would all beg to differ. They shared a common secret, prayed a common prayer, and worked in common purpose at a farmhouse blessed from within by an uncommon grace and an eternal love. The decades spent steeped in discovery was the ultimate childhood adventure, for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as they lived, or perhaps even longer. When someone is young and has no sense of how fragile life is, being surrounded by and reminded about death can be a saving grace in its own respect. There is nothing wrong with having a healthy respect for death. It helps a mindful soul become more aware of the intrinsic value of life. Developing an appreciation for both matures a mind, unlocking the gate. It is one of the keys to enlightenment. Once that path is sufficiently illuminated, one is less likely to stumble over an obstacle or take a wrong turn in the dark. Seeing is believing. The eye of the beholder is gifted with a sight too bright to believe at first, found in the shadows of one's peripheral vision. To see the other side of existence is a blessing, not a curse. Bestowed with uncommon knowledge, coveted in silence, kept a perpetual secret for 3 decades after the fact, part of this process is awakening to the notion that this is not the kind of news one should take to the grave. Having major implications for all mankind, it would be selfish to withhold evidence, a sin of omission. That it happened with purpose and reason is reason enough to assume a significant discovery, compelling information meant to disperse. The world waited patiently for 30 years, not knowing what it had missed. There is merit in telling the truth when it benefits others, no matter the risk to one's reputation. The Perron family had to get past the fear of rejection and a scrutiny that would surely accompany any pronouncement of this nature. As a fate was accepted, so was the responsibility which accompanied it. To bear witness to such events, then to divulge the details in earnest, requires courage. There are elements of this memoir which are quite literally unbelievable, thus requiring a leap of faith. Therein lies the risk, not being believed. There was a time when such rejection seemed a fate worse than death. No more. They overcame their fear of mortals in much the same way they overcame the fear of immortal souls. With the awareness came a willingness to cast doubt aside and share with those who do believe, so they too may find some peace. To live unencumbered, free of the fear of death. To embrace the moment is a holy endeavor. To be in touch with the planet, observing the transition from darkness to light at dawn. To feel the earth spin, to feel its vibration beneath bare feet is a gift. As a variation on a theme, they have put the old Yankee adage to good use: live free or die trying. Ask any of the children what they think about those years. The best decade of my life. What a blessing. Valuable lessons were learned. To live in the moment, unconcerned about the hereafter, is liberating. A lifetime knowing there is something beyond mortal existence is truly a blessing. Who would consider such uncommon knowledge a curse? And I close it with one of my absolute favorite, he's British, this thing for Brits, I don't know what it is. The closing is, better to lose count while naming your blessings than to lose your blessings to counting your troubles. And that's Maltby Babcock wrote that. So I will sign this for you and let you have this when we're done.
Thank you so much. I think what's so incredibly...
I'm sorry I get so emotional. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I can't help it.
I just think that so many children or families today, how would they have come through that with the same attitude? I mean, I know it's called House of Darkness, House of Light, but you somehow have managed to take that and turn it into family unity and something very positive. And like you said, learning and knowledge from that as well. And I don't know how.
Because I question too how how much of an internal battle it must be to watch these entities terrorize your mother.
Yeah.
But yet feel love for them at the same time. I mean, that must have been a constant roller coaster of emotions. But that described it to some extent. I was kind of like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But
because especially your mother, she was very influenced by Bathsheba at one point. So the girls had to watch their mother change progressively in front of their eyes.
Yes.
That must have been really...
That was... I don't want to say that was terrifying, because it wasn't. We never really lost her. She was still Mom, but she was dressed in vintage clothing, black head to toe, started using archaic language. And at first we thought, well, she's spending countless hours reading 100-year-old, 200-year-old books. She's hearing this language all the time. You start to assimilate the concept that, well, she's just mimicking back what, but that wasn't really what happened. And we didn't want to deal with what was happening, because we were starting to we felt abandoned by our father, because he tried to be away as much as he could. He couldn't control the situation, so it was best to not be there. But then when we started to lose our mother, that's when I'm like the most parentified person you will ever meet in your life. I mean, from the age of 12 years old, I was raising my 4 younger sisters, which is probably why I decided not to breed as an adult. I've already done that, okay? Now it's about me. But I had a very active role raising my 4 younger sisters, because I had to, because someone had to. And it wasn't that my mother neglected any of her responsibilities. Nobody worked harder. She had a beautiful garden every year. We fed not only our family, but the whole neighborhood out of it. I mean, she worked incessantly, and she worked under the most grueling conditions, because her body was literally breaking down. She was in a process of transformation that is truly difficult to describe unless you see it. And because it happened incrementally, because it happened so gradually, it wasn't until I went away to college and then came back and I realized how much my mother had changed. I mean, just physically, how much she had changed, how much she had aged living in that house. My mother is a lovely, beautiful woman, but she looks 30 years older than she actually is. And it started in that house. I mean, she was, I think, 29 when we moved in there, and she looked like she was 18 and had 5 little children running around. And it started in that house.
Wasn't she?
She was, and it was very conflicting. And I always thought psychologically that it was very interesting that the one spirit that my father befriended was the one that was terrifying my mother.
That is really...
And, you know, I had everybody write an essay for Volume 3. They will blow your mind. It will blow your mind.
This is the one that's the final.
Out of the park. And my father was the first one to get it back to me. And I offered everybody else, as I've been going through the whole publication process, if there's anything you want to change, I won't give him his back, because it's so telling that I would not want him to change a word of it. So I said, Dad, it's just perfect, just the way it is. It's going into the book just the way it is. I did not give him the option to revisit it. Anyone who's really reading this book, reading between the lines of this book, will know that there are some things that happened in that house that we will never share with anyone outside of our family, ever, ever. And they will also see what the real dynamics were psychologically between my mother and father. And you see all through Volume 1, now Volume 2, and going into Volume 3, there are a number of recurring themes, but the predominant theme is war and peace.
really, really interesting.
And the thing that's most ironic about that is all that my father wanted was all that my mother wanted, and that was peace and quiet. They both wanted the exact same thing, but it was war. It was war between my mother and the spirit vying to retain her position as mistress of the house. It was war between my mother and my father, him not believing what was happening. And there were times, I'm actually grateful that my father will never read these books. He can't. Christine, bless her heart, she tried. She tried. My mother is the only one in the family that's read this. And Christine, after the first volume came, I gave everyone a hard copy signed edition of it. And one night I was in the kitchen just making a very late pot of coffee, I'll admit. I have way too much caffeine flowing in my veins. And I was standing in the kitchen and I heard Christine's bedroom door open, and I turned and I looked, and she was holding the book in a very strange way. She was holding the book like this, and she came out of her bedroom. She must have heard me in the kitchen, and she handed it back to me, and she said, "I can't. I made it to page 60. I can't." And I said, "Well, honey, it's your book. It's allowed to stay in your room. You don't have to read it." And she said, "No, take it, take it, take it." And she will never crack the cover again. Not of this volume, not of the next, not of the third. She never will.
Do you think there's still a lot of stuff she hasn't told you?
I know that there's stuff that she hasn't told me, and I know what some of it is, but I heard it from Cindy. Cindy and Chris shared a room, so a lot of the stories about Christine aren't directly from Christine. They're from witnesses to what happened to Christine, including myself. But there are things that happened to Chris in that house that she will never share with anyone. The same is true for April. The same is true for Cindy. The same is true for me. There's a reason why 5 little girls never used the bathroom alone, ever.
Angie and I last night, just prior, we were, researching, and we both fell asleep, and we both had this same dream that we were in the bathroom and there's a crowd of people in the bathroom with us.
But I wasn't in the bathroom with Devon. I was in my own bathroom in my dream. And I'm like, I couldn't go to the bathroom because there's so many people in there. And then she starts telling me, I had the weirdest dream about being in the bathroom. And I'm like,
and then all these people are in the bathroom with me, and then you just, and it's just stupid.
We just had the same dream and the same.
And then you're just saying, it's just something really, really simple. So Lorraine's.
Well, great minds think alike. That's all that I can say about that.
Can we just go back? Can we just theorize something? And this is absolutely nothing to take away from your experiences or anything like that.
We were just theorizing because it's such a hard concept to grasp your experience, and it's just like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, wait, it's so hard. It's so amazing and emotional, but it's just not. It's so out of the norm, so out of my concept of reality, And I had this dream. I have sometimes some very movie-like dreams are very bizarre, but to condense it down, an alien appeared in my dream, but the alien did not want me to see it the way it was, because it was grotesque and scary, so it projected a thought into my mind, and when, in my dream, as I see this alien, I know it's an alien, but it comes across as a little girl holding a teddy bear.
A safe image. Yes,
image.
Exactly.
But also in my mind, because it was a projection, she wasn't solid. She was like a ghost.
Translucent.
So, yeah. And it kind of, we were just saying, like, I wonder if that's even possible, first of all. Like, if that dream is just some weird thought that I made up in my head, or if that is something that really could explain some ghosts.
To have a manifestation of a lot of ghosts that were focused and had a purpose was so unusual. So we just, we'll stretch our minds and take it out. And I think absolutely we believe everything you're saying. But what if this was some kind of alien group that was like, you know what, this is probably how they dress in that period, and this is probably how they speak, except they were like 2 centuries wrong or something. It was just...
Like, how did all of these entities come together?
I am perfectly prepared to answer this for you, and I'm going to say some things to both of you now that I have not shared with anyone at all.
Fire us.
Everyone in my family has had close encounters with unidentified flying objects. Some of us have had closer encounters than others. I did not include anything about it in the book, in any of the books, and I think that was my own paranoia. I did not want to make that connection because I wanted this to be taken seriously. I wanted this to be treated as a piece of literature, not for entertainment, but for educational purposes, to inform. We all saw things on that farm that could not ever be explained out on that property, up in the sky, things that landed in our garden and left a burn spot before it took off. Things that I suspect there is some connection between spiritual reality and another reality, which I have lifelong presumed. Lifelong. Ever since I remember thinking that there was something beyond us. And I have been, as recently as, I might call you and say, edit this out, okay? As recently as a week ago, I had a close encounter that was so intense that I had to end a Skype call because there was interference on the line. And there's always interference, especially when I'm back and forth to England, especially. But I was just Skyping with a friend who had written an absolutely hauntingly beautiful piece of music for me for this project. And she was playing it. And then after she was done, and I said to her, Susan, I recognize that piece of music now. You know you wrote it in the 80s and you've never recorded it, so how do I know every note of it? How do I know? And suddenly her image started to break up, an image that had been completely clear, and I always have issues. Watch your Skype. Watch, because that's a really easy medium for them to come through. It's out there already. And I had an alien being unquestioningly staring me directly in the face. And at first I thought somehow the computer has transformed my friend into this, and how could that be? Except that she said, Andrea, I can see the back of it. Well, I could see the front of it. And I said, this conversation's over, I'll call you on the phone. And I disconnected the call. And I have never seen anything like it in my life. It was so gruesome that it was beautiful. And it was perfect in its loveliness. And it was non-threatening. And it was not computer-generated. It had 2 laser-like red point eyes that looked directly into my eyes. And it was there for a minimum of 15 seconds before I got to the point where I couldn't take it in anymore.
So it didn't look like the typical grey, with the big eyes and...
No, it was lovely. It was humanoid. It was absolutely humanoid. It had a perfectly... I am probably going to ask you to take this out of this. It had It looked like it had patent leather skin. It was black like this, but shiny. And and all I could see was its head and its shoulders, and it was doing something, and I could hear all the background electronic noises, like the synthesizer noise that I always hear on Skype that comes through, and usually I just assume it's the spirits. And when I'm conversing with someone on Skype, I tell them to stop. Please stop, because you're interfering with my conversation. And they do, but it didn't stop this time. And its head was down, and it had silver studs all the way down the center of its face and over its shoulders and around its head that way, so that there was a perfect cross on the top of its head when its head was down, but its hands, its arms were busy with some kind of equipment, and there were lights in the background all around it, and I knew I was looking at the inside of a spaceship. There was no question in my mind, none. And there never will be. And it lifted its head, and it looked directly at me. And I felt no sense of a threat whatsoever, but it was making its presence known.
Wow.
And this happened 5 days ago.
We were just talking earlier with Michelle, where she said that
about the
people
buzzing
that have the negative blood type, there's a theory out there that it could be alien, the mutation, and that the aliens keep track of the people.
Yeah, she was talking,
and they watch them. It's a theory out there.
Because they were also talking about when they astral travel, that they get the pinpoint white light, but there is this buzzing, that cannot be replicated, right? She said buzzing is so...
I'm very familiar with it. Very. But I didn't, maybe that's another book at another time. Maybe there's a way to integrate the two subjects, but I don't know how they integrate.
Yeah, exactly.
And 40 years ago, when all of this happened, nobody would have taken it seriously back then. There would have only been a handful of people. We couldn't tell our story 3 decades ago when we left that house, because the world wasn't ready for it yet. It wasn't, and we all knew it, and we didn't tell anyone. My best friend didn't know for 30 years that I grew up in a haunted house, and she was angry when I told her. I just quit my job. What? I said, I'm going to write the story about the haunted house that I grew up in. What? Really? She really thought I was just calling Pittsburgh to jerk her chain.
We've had this conversation with John Tenney recently, where he was just talking about like I said, the language and the knowledge restricting us. So back in the day, they called this witchcraft because they didn't know any better. Witchcraft morphed into alien abduction, contactee movement. We never hear about that anymore. Why? Because that's moved into possessions. Because look at, if you want to call it symptoms or occurrences, sleep paralysis, balls of light, shadow people, strange noises. So depending on what our language is or what our knowledge is, what the trend is, this is what they are giving a title to. And I cannot help but feel we are so close. If we could have a mastermind theory to go, what is the link between alien and what we are perceiving as hauntings? Or is it parallel dimensions? Are we getting glimpses into a wormhole? Are we energy that's traveling through portals and we get glimpses of it? I just feel if we could just get our heads together, it's so close. But then it's like in a really hard math class going, can I take a nap for 10 minutes? Because I don't.
Well, that's how I wrote the books. My mother said I lived on caffeine and catnaps for 3 years, and she's right. And it gets so intense. Even just editing Volume 2 was so emotional for me because it really is the guts of the story. It's everything that happened to my mother. It's everything that happened with Ed and Lorraine Warren. It is...
Is the movie The Conjuring based on Volume 2 or the 3?
The Conjuring, which it began as The Conjuring, it became The Warren Files as its working title, but now it's back to The Conjuring, and that's it. It's going to stay that. and which I'm thrilled about because I thought that was the perfect title for it, because Mr. and Mrs. Warren really did conjure up what came into our home that night. They did, with the help of a medium and a priest. They represented it in the film. I'm not going to tell you that. It's represented differently in the film than what is written in the book. And that is because the film is based on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They came to our home 6 times, but we lived there for 10 years. So there were a lot from their perspective, and there will be another film that's
From your perspective?
yes.
Awesome.
However, I gave them as much information as they could possibly have asked for. Not only did I publish volume 1 before they even began shooting the film so that they would have that, but I gave them about 75 pages of treatment. I gave them a very extensive timeline of events and major manifestations to work from. I do believe that they did strive for authenticity. But, of course, it's a film that's made in Hollywood, so there are going to be, I tell people all the time, absolutely see this film. It's testing out of the stratosphere. It's going to be a blockbuster. There's no question about it. None. However, if you want to know the truth and all the details of what happened to us, and if you want to become part of the journey that the family took, so many of my readers say, I felt like I was there with you. And that I could receive no higher compliment, because that's how I wrote the book. I wrote it so that I would take my reader by the hand, come with me on this journey. And that way, and I've had some people say it reads like a very long meditation. It reads lyrically like poetry. Well, it is. It's all of that, because it was a truly life-altering series of events, and it needs to be represented in not only its harshest terms and, in some ways brutally honest, especially regarding my mother and father's relationship, but also the soft side. And my mother is the one that titled the book, and I was a good year into writing the manuscript, and one day she walked up to my desk, just trying to pull me away from the computer for just a minute to have a cup of coffee with her, and I looked at her and I said, Mom, I don't have a title for this book. And she looked at me and she said, House of Darkness, House of Light. Because it was both.
It really is. It really is. I mean, just some of the experiences you have, and that's why I think that's so important, what you just read from Volume 2, to understand that despite that, you guys were just able to still take that knowledge and what you saw and turn that into a blessing. I mean, that's real strength of character as well.
We didn't have a choice.
Exactly. I'm sure you get that question all the time. Why didn't you guys just pack up
and leave like so many others have? But we weren't supposed to. I mean, everything that conspired to get us into the house conspired to keep us in the house once we got there. I swear to God, the spirits they're responsible for Richard Nixon and the fall of our economy in the beginning of the 1970s, because it was like everything conspired to keep us in that house. And none of us wanted to leave. None of us except my mother wanted to leave that house. And she couldn't wait to get out, and it was almost like a prison sentence for 10 years of her life. She begged to be let free of that house. And Volume 3 is difficult to read too, because she thought she was free, and she wasn't. There was no escaping unscathed.
So she's still the spirit's
All of us.
So now I just want to read Volume 2 right now.
10 days, I'll send you a copy signed.
All right. I can't. Some meat and potatoes.
It influenced so much of your life for 10 years, and then you finally got out, but then you ended up changing your entire life to go back to the story for your job and engulfing yourself in it. So it's like, even though you were free, you weren't free.
Oh, and none of us ever will be. And that's one of the most important realizations. My mother put it very succinctly. She said, it's amazing that all these years have passed, and when it came time to tell this story, when it came time to exhume the dead, that we worked 30 years to bury as deeply as we possibly could. It was amazing how close to the surface they were buried.
You said that you felt there was 12 spirits in the house?
There's at least 12 identifiable spirits in the house. Whether it be Johnny Arnold, Mrs. Arnold, Bathsheba Sherman, the little girls, the little boy with his father, the Bakers, these are the ones that we were, through historical research, pretty much able to identify were these. But there were others as well, that including the one who I looked at. I never saw her before that day, and I never saw her after that day. Never. But I think she's the one that would tuck my sisters in at night that smelled the flowers and fruit, because I remember distinctly her sweetness, the smell of her sweetness when I was standing beside her. And she would kiss us on the forehead and never actually really touch us. But she wasn't benign, she was benevolent. And if she is truly who I was 200 years ago, then that carried through, that we share a soul, because I am as benevolent as any human being could be. I live to bring joy to other people, which is part of the reason why I felt so compelled. I knew I was the writer in the family. I was the one with an English degree and a philosophy degree, and my father always said, "What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? All right, there you go. Okay, I'm a late bloomer. I didn't start till I was 49, but still, back off, dude, because these are my degrees." And he is so shocked by everything that's happening around this, but it's still so emotional for him. He can't read the book. My mother is the only one that has, from cover to cover, has read the book. And April, and it affected April profoundly.
April's the baby, right?
The baby, yeah. It really did. I mean, she had to drive from Woodstock, Georgia, down to Belanger to spend the weekend with us so that she could sit with me and process her emotional reactions to reliving her past in the pages of a book.
And how's Nancy doing?
Very quiet, very reserved about this. I don't think she's read it either. But she and Cindy are thick as thieves, and they're on the phone for 2 to 3 hours a day each other, and so that's good for them because they get to process it that way. But this is a process that will never end. And there are so many questions still left for us. I mean, just even bringing up the possibility of aliens existing, and do they exist simultaneously with the spirit world? Are they the source of spirit? Are they God?
Yeah. There's so many questions, and then even if you want to take it back, I mean, was the house on any kind of ley lines? Like, why is that house so active?
What is it that traps them there?
Exactly. And then, I mean, you said people have come and gone to this house, but the current owners have been there for over
25 years. They've been there, and they moved into the house knowing that it was haunted and knowing part of the story. Rhode Island is a tiny, tiny little patch of land, about this big, and everybody knows everybody, and word got around about us while we lived in the house, so that when this couple bought the house, they'd heard enough about it, and they're both very spiritual, very intellectual people who were prepared and were as drawn to it as we were. And we don't know why yet, but interestingly, Norma did exactly what my mother did. Norma saw the house advertised, went to look at it, put money down on the house, and her husband was out of town.
Oh, history repeats itself. Wow.
And I didn't even know that until the last time that I went to visit, which was just a few months ago.
Are you going
That's when
to
she
write
told
a
me.
book on them?
I am. I already told them that I would, yes. And a lot of their experiences have been very similar to our own. But they didn't. See, Norma acquiesced instantly. She crossed that threshold saying, this is your house,
Right.
and we are the caretakers, and we want only peace here. And so they haven't had the kind of tumultuous, conflicting battle going on that existed between my mother and the spirit we call Bathsheba. Because she posed no threat. My mother did.
Exactly. Do you think having 5 prepubescent girls also agitated everything?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And are you saying that once Lorraine and Ed came in, of course they meant well?
They did.
Do you believe that them coming in, agitated the pot even further?
I do, and through no fault of their
Absolutely.
own. I absolutely believe, as does every member of our family, believe that Ed and Lorraine Warren were there for all the right reasons. And they made some mistakes. We're all human, and we make mistakes. They did not mean, in their excitement about this discovery and what they saw happening there and what they sensed and what they felt and what they witnessed. They talked a little bit too much, maybe divulged a little bit too much. And we started having people showing up at the door. And my mother said, how do you know about, why are you here? Always cordial, but why are you here? And within no time at all, we figured out it was because the Warrens had just done a seminar at Rhode Island College. And everybody went, whoa, it's in the neighborhood, we're going. No, you're not. It was, and they didn't do it deliberately. Absolutely not. They were just so enthralled with what they had stumbled into. And so all is forgiven for that. And, we had a few things to forgive. She still got all my mother's material that she loaned her 35 years ago, and we never got it back.
So to clarify then, when you go into volume 2, this talks about when Lorraine and Ed come in.
Yes.
And what the journey that they have with the 6 visits to your house and the consequence.
And my parents went to their house once in Monroe, Connecticut. And the reason that they did was because they had so much trouble photographing or recording anything in the house because there was always mechanical and electronic interference. There was always either nothing but white noise, cameras being broken in the basement, in the cellar. It's all in volume 2. They tried to capture as much as they could with state-of-the-art equipment for the time, and the spirits wanted no part of it. And so they did everything that they could to interfere with that process. So consequently, in order to get a really good interview with my mother and father, they had to drive to the other side of Connecticut so that they could be in kind of a neutral space in order to record that. And actually, they've got a recording of my mother talking about what was happening in the house. And I will never allow my mother to hear it because it doesn't even sound like her.
Really?
She was already well into a state of what I can only presume was oppression, which is, of course, one step beneath possession. But we were very conflicted as well because we were Catholic, and the Catholic Church really wanted nothing to do with us. And yet, that's the foundation and all the fundamentals of the study of demonology and the existence of, you're the people that invented these concepts, right, and you're telling us back off. Well, who's, if not you, who?
Right.
So there's a lot of...
Wow, volume 2 sounds...
Oh, volume 2 will blow you away.
Do you think that the house itself, or the spirits themselves, would have had any influence over the church, saying they wanted nothing to do with you because of the church's history with...
I wouldn't rule anything out. One thing that I have learned in the process of living in that house, and then beyond living in that house, is that they are more powerful than we give them credit for. When they can manipulate objects the way that they do, and take a stereo system and heave it across a room, and it lands in the corner of a room and it's unscratched, untouched, and works perfectly well. An antique bottle that goes flying through the air at 50 or 60 miles an hour and bounces off a glass window. It should have shattered the glass, it should have shattered the bottle, everything's fine. What dimension is this happening in?
Yeah.
One of the most fascinating stories that I will tell you, and I will not tell you the woman's name because she doesn't want it out in public, but I know for a fact of a woman who went to the farm. I was not with her when this happened, but there are numerous witnesses to this. She went to the farm to take some photographs for me, and is friendly with the current owners, and she'd never been there before, but she contacted me about the book. She was so moved by it, and she contacted the owners and asked if she could go. And when she walked into that house, a woman who has been profoundly hard of hearing her entire life since the age of 12 was able to hear perfectly for the first time in her adult life, and she's almost 70 years old. And when she drove off that property, she lost her hearing again, and she wept all the way home.
The house, the property, is that sat in some kind of little dimension vortex?
It's a portal cleverly disguised as a farmhouse.
But more than a portal.
But more than that. It is more than that, yes.
Because that's just made every single hair stand up. It's like just putting another piece in the jigsaw. Because then that would explain why you can keep getting repeaters, why you can get these paradoxes. Could it be that this vortex thing, there's a bunch of multiverses within that, where you can bounce and interchange? Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you need a nap?
I mean, if you, yeah.
Do you understand?
Do you understand?
Well,
I mean, that's hard to.
It would, if there was some kind of theory to be worked out with that possibility, then a lot of these questions.
We'll know a lot more in a few weeks, ladies. I don't talk about this a lot with a lot of people. And there's a reason for that, because I'd really like to see all of this transpire, but essentially the Mayans were correct. The end of the world is December 21st, 2012. It's not the end of the world as we know it.
As we know it.
It is the beginning of the world as we will know it. The reason, now there are Mayan scholars who say the only reason that they stopped the calendar when they did was because they were such a barbaric society that they killed off all of the intelligentsia within their own society that were mathematically capable of creating the calendar. There's that school of thought. And then there's the other school of thought. And we are now, and I know this, and I will not tell you how I know this, but you must trust me. We are leaving the age of Pisces. We are going into the age of Aquarius. It is happening now. And it began in earnest about 3 to 4 months ago. And as we cross over into the new year 2013, there will be a whole new awareness worldwide, and both of you and myself are a very, very important part of it. Have you been having dizzy spells? Have you been having headaches that are inexplicable headaches? Do you feel swelling in your joints that is not normal? Do you feel vibrations in your chest through your sternum? Is your sleep being disturbed, but you don't know why? Are you having physical issues? Are you feeling the earth shift underneath you while you walk, but you don't know why? Those of us, and there are millions of people around this world who think exactly the same way that we do, we are the ones that will help the others.
Guide them.
And that's why what you're doing here is so important. because part of that transitional ascension, that awakening process, has to do with what you are doing right here, right now.
Education.
It's just as important as what this story is telling. I told you in the ladies' room, I have a quantum physicist who said this is empirical evidence of the existence of a fourth dimension. Allow me to take it one more step. It is empirical evidence of the existence of multiple dimensions. And all of this will begin to be revealed to us as we ascend into the age of Aquarius, the water bearer. Let me show you something.
I told you it's a spiritual awakening. I've been saying that the whole time.
I'll prove it to you now. I have to be very ginger with this. My mother's copy. This is the first book that came off the presses right here. Look at the publication date.
Is it the first published by Author House? 3/4/2011.
That was a very important date. The day this book walked into my house, the big brown truck pulled up in front of our little house in Georgia. It went to market. That was its publication date. That was its copyright date. Check the numbers on that. It showed up at our door with a really hot UPS. Are they all hot? Are they all really that hot, all UPS drivers? Because ours was gorgeous. And he handed me the brown book. It was covered in the big heavy to protect it. And he handed it to me. As he handed it to me, I heard behind me on the television breaking news. Earthquake in Japan. Tsunami. The water baron. The beginning of the end of the nuclear age. There are four nuclear reactors that are in full, complete meltdown in Japan.
Is that Fukushima?
Fukushima Daiichi. They can't stop it.
It is terrifying. And there's also, of course, I mean, that's going to be a whole other show, but there's the conspiracy theory that moments before that happened, they're putting it down to HAARP. And they were saying there was all this distortion with the clouds, and it wasn't a coincidence that it was twice the epicenter was right underneath that nuclear reactor. But what's really scary and what people don't think about is what happens to all that nuclear waste. And of course,
it's going into the Pacific Ocean and it's poisoning the largest ocean on the planet.
But the thing is, we're eating the fish.
Yes. And we're breathing the air. It's already here.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of the end of the nuclear age. And it was the foray into the entrance of the age of Aquarius. And I don't care who thinks I'm nuts. I don't care. I'm right. There was no mistake that this book, this story, came out and went to market worldwide at precisely the same moment that event occurred on the other side of the planet.
That's very true. Very, very true.
There is no such thing as coincidence. None.
There's going to be no coincidence in your life. Everything's been synchronicity right from the beginning.
That's right.
So we're just going to finish up with Volume 3. So Volume 3 means it never ended. The spirits, are they still with you today?
This is a never-ending story. And that's one of the things that's so delightful about it, because you can't experience something like this and then just simply dismiss it and say, okay, well, been there, done that, that's over. We've moved from there, we've moved on. We went 1,200 miles away when we moved from that house in June of 1980. And one of the most compelling episodes of Volume 3, which ends in Cherokee County, Georgia, here, is the fact that Ed and Lorraine Warren contacted my mother not a month after we moved out of the house, and they wanted to either make a film or they wanted to write a book, or they wanted to give her a ghostwriter, which I still laugh about. That is so funny. She said, and they said, this a very lucrative offer. This is something that we can do for you to share your story, but that will help other people. And Lorraine made a very compelling argument. And my mother said, I have to talk to my husband about this, but my tendency is to think best left behind. And that night, my mother was attacked in the cellar of the house that we had moved to in Georgia. And she said, and this house was at the time all of maybe 30 years old. So it wasn't something that was in there. It was something that came with us. And after that happened, she called Lorraine back and said, absolutely not. Please don't ever call me again.
Her heart was just sunk.
She was very badly hurt.
Really?
And she thought she was free, which was the saddest part of all, because she thought she was free. And that's why I wrote the chapter, Escaping Unscathed. There is no escaping unscathed. It's, one of my favorite lines in the book is childhood trauma, the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Because it is. It informs everything. It informs everything. None of us look at the world the same way that the vast majority of people look at the world. And I wouldn't want to look at the world that way, because most people see things in relatively black and white terms.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it all in technicolor and multi-dimensions, and I watch the universe burgeon and expand in front of me, day to day, and so does everybody else in our family. We don't approach life the same way, and that's part of what I wrote about in Curses and Blessings and Curses.
Right.
You never do ever recover. You never do get over it. It's the gift that keeps on giving. You can't give it back. Once you've had that level of exposure to the other side, to the supernatural realm, to, it's the new paranormal. It's like the new normal, which is black and white, or the new paranormal, which is technicolor, or Disney on mescaline. Okay, that's how life is for all of us. And we live in the moment. We don't worry about the past, and we don't worry about the future, because it'll all take care of itself. But, interestingly, I will share one thing with you that I'll leave you with your audience to do with as you please. The one thing that I will leave you with is something that was pretty shocking that just happened to our family. The people at New Line Cinema who are producing, have made this film, have been lovely, absolutely wonderful to our family, and have tried every way that they know how to accommodate us, and were kind enough to invite us out to the set. And they were doing some filming in Wilmington, North Carolina. They did not use the actual house, but they rebuilt it on a soundstage there, and then they had a remote set. Well, they invited us out last March, and we came in from all over the country. I happened to be in Michigan at the time. Family came up from Florida. Everybody went except my mother, who at the last moment reneged on taking the trip. And interestingly, when we got to the set, the other mistress of the house, Lily Taylor, who plays my mother, didn't come out to the set either. So the two matriarchs were missing, and everyone else was there. And we were in the midst of granting them a family interview, and a supernatural wind cut that set in half. And it blew the cameras and the screens and the equipment everywhere. And I looked forward. I was standing in the back row, and I looked at my sister Christine, and I said, Bathsheba's curse. And she said, yes. We didn't find out for 3 hours afterwards, because we were in the middle of an interview and all of our cell phones were turned off. But that is precisely the time that my mother fell and broke her hip, and she was home alone. And it was the first time in years that my mother has been home alone. We are always with her. One of us is always with her. And We didn't find out till about 4:30 that afternoon. One of my nieces or nephews got through with a text that said, "Grandma has fallen and broken her hip. She's in the hospital." Well, talk about bringing an otherwise very festive, very interesting day to an abrupt halt. She was so bad that they didn't know if she would survive the surgery or the anesthesia. So what they did was they put a morphine drip on her and had her sleep throughout the night, and they situated the hip in such a way that she could not move, and they didn't do the surgery until the following afternoon. Well, we had been there all day. The doctor said, "Don't drive all night long to come back from Wilmington to Atlanta. Come tomorrow." And at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 carloads of us, the 5 daughters, were praying for her on walkie-talkies between our 2 vehicles. "Please let Mom survive. Please let Mom survive the anesthesia." And we got to the hospital at about 5:30. All 5 Perron women walked in at the same time, and heads just turned, because a lot of people know about us in this area. And we all walked straight into my mother's bedroom. The doctor, the nurse, everybody was in there. She had just come out of surgery, and she sat up on her bed, and she was completely sedated. And she sat straight up in bed, looked me directly in the eye, and she said, "I have not felt that presence for more than 30 years. Bathsheba's curse. She does not want to be exposed." And then she laid back down, and she went into this coma-like, I mean, she has no recollection of it, but we, have umpteen witnesses that were there and heard her say, "I have not felt that presence for more than 30 years. This is Bathsheba's curse." And we knew it when it happened. We knew it because when that wind came through that set while we were granting that interview, I looked around and we were on an expansive piece of property, and there wasn't a breeze anywhere on that property. Full-blown trees that weren't moving at all. But there was a 75-mile-an-hour wind that was cutting our interview in half. Chairs and cameras and screens and lights flying. And
what about when the movie's released? What will happen?
I don't know, but I've already had it out with... I went out on the night of the supermoon, and I said, "You got a problem? You take it up with me. You leave my mother alone. Don't you ever touch my mother again."
That wasn't the 4th of March now, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was March 21st.
No, I was just thinking about the publishing date of your book, and that was pretty close.
No, pretty close.
So Volume 1 builds a story. Volume 2, meat and potatoes. Volume 3 is going to blow it out the park. Where can people find out more about you?
You can go to my website at houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com. Please, anybody that's interested, I have the most beautiful, resplendent timeline on Facebook.
You do.
Isn't it lovely? I work on it every single day. Just a few minutes. I pick, I choose, I pass on the messages and the most lovely images, and I keep in touch with my friends that way. It's really nice because I have friends all over the world. But I also have a House of Darkness, House of Light author page, so you can subscribe to that, and that'll keep you up to date on everything that's going on around the movie, when that's going to be released. The movie was supposed to come out in January, but the studio is so thrilled with the finished product that they moved it to summer blockbuster position in July, and it opens in New York City. And I'm very excited about that. And I'm squarely behind this project. I gave them as much as I could possibly give them. I know that this film was made with integrity. This film was made with an eye to authenticity and not a lot of special effects. And I have it personally from James Wan, how much of an investment that he made in this. I've met the screenwriters. I've met all the actors. I know what went into this project, and I'm very proud to represent it.
Wonderful. And are you going to finish off with a little trademark 10?
Sure, yes. We have
that you'd be wonderful.
I have been.
Rapid fire questions we ask everybody. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word is metaphysician. Or metaphysical. I love the metaphysical poets. I love the metaphysical writers. My first real attachment to this thing I call God was through Emerson, Whitman, and Thoreau, through the metaphysical writers of their time. And that's really where I started to understand my paganism.
Paganism is easier to say than metaphysics. All right.
Because I'm not of this world.
Exactly.
What is your least favorite?
Hate.
What turns you on?
Clean.
Well, that's a long list, actually, but there's one particular person at the top of it. I certainly love getting into my animals. I'm such a creature of habit when it comes to rescuing every animal that comes down the pike. And the great love of my life is Gracie Pearl, my Great Pyrenees. My cats, my dogs, books. I spend my whole life reading and writing. I'm a huge fan of the theater. I spent 20 years as a cast member with the Theater Company of Rhode Island. I've written plays. I have a long, just Google me. Google me, baby. But, what turns me on is... I don't mean it to sound cliche, but what turns me on is like turning on a light bulb. Let there be light. Let there be awareness. Let there be education. Let there be information. Let people evolve. Let the mind expand. Light turns me on.
So then what turns you off?
What turns me off more than anything else in my life is ignorance. Sheer ignorance. I have no tolerance for it, none whatsoever.
What sound or noise do you love?
Music. It's part of my soul. I would, if I had to sacrifice my sight or my hearing, I would certainly sacrifice my sight first. I think that I would cease to exist without music.
So what sound or noise do you
The sound of my mother crying.
John Tenney said that.
I can't handle it.
Yeah, it's so many. Must be the empaths that we chat to.
Anybody in my family. Anybody, but particularly my mother. And she cries about once a decade. But I remember every time I ever saw her cry in my life. I want to take all of her pain. All of it. Because I can handle it. Exactly.
What keeps you awake at night?
Nothing. When I finally lay down, I have no fear of anything except asteroids and viruses. The really big stuff that you can't get out of the way of, and the really stuff that'll get you when you're not looking. But I live a fearless life. Nothing keeps me awake at night. When I lay my head down, it's usually I'm asleep before it hits the pillow because I've just worked for 16 to 18 hours straight. And so it's time for a cat nap, and nothing keeps me up at night. Or in the afternoon, or the late mid-morning, or, whenever my body says, lay down.
What is your favorite television show?
Oh. If I tell you, you won't believe me. But I'll tell you anyway. My favorite television show is called Sunday Morning. And it's like going to church for me. It's on CBS. It started with Charles Kuralt when I was a student in college. I've never missed a single episode of it. It's about the arts. It's about beauty. It's about expanding human consciousness. It's about everything. But my favorite guilty pleasure, so this is a two-pronged answer, is Dancing with the Stars. And I am addicted to it. And I want to be so famous someday that they say, you, come here. Because I can ballroom dance.
I bet you can. That'll be fun. We're going to have to create our own little mysterious world so you think you can dance.
With karaoke too. So
Exactly. Michelle wants karaoke, so a lot of departments going on.
So what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I should have been a meteorologist. I'm absolutely fascinated with all things weather and all of the movement of everything that occurs with our atmosphere and the stratosphere, or an astronaut. If somebody said, would you like to go out into space? Boom, gone. I'm gone. Just strap me in. I would go instantly. I would go into outer space. I would have been an astronaut or a meteorologist.
My body could never handle going into space. What profession would you not like to attempt?
I think the one thing that I would probably be very bad at would be, I think being a firefighter. Because I don't think, or actually, I could never be in a situation, a veterinarian or a firefighter, where I would see death. I used to think when I was a young girl that I was destined to be a veterinarian. You can't love animals as much as you do and not become a veterinarian. But in the process of my own self-discovery, I worked for a brief time at a veterinary clinic, and I learned very quickly that it absolutely would not work for me, that you have to be almost heartless to love your work that much. You have to not let every case that comes through that door break your heart, because it'll break you down. And I only worked there for about 3 months, and it broke me down.
That's why I wanted to be a vet too, because of James Herriot, and exact same reasons I couldn't
do it.
So I became a rescuer instead.
Me too.
There you go.
Kindred spirits, sacred sisters, we are.
Exactly.
Okay, the final one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the throne?
Well, first of all, God is not a he or a she. God is an it. It's the infinite mind and intelligence in the universe, I believe. And I don't think that there are pearly gates, and I don't think that there's what we have in the human construct created to make God in our own image, rather than allowing ourselves to become the image of God and evolve out. We instead take all of that we cannot conceptualize, and we bring it down here so that we can relate. And so, first of all, I don't buy into the whole notion of that. However, and I hear the voice of God every day, and I live in heaven. So I'm very familiar with the environment, and this is only one tiny little piece of it on this planet. There's so much more. So I don't need to greet God or be greeted by God any more at the end of my life than I did at the beginning. Because when I open my eyes in the morning, the devil runs for cover, and God says, good morning.
All right. They're really good answers. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you so much.
Thank
We've
you.
really enjoyed it. Thank you.